Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this session. I'm Andy Samways, Director of Unity Research School, one of the two research schools collaborating on this new venture. We're delighted to be joined tonight by a number of colleagues on this team facilitating this session that we've designed. We've aimed it at supporting tutor development, and we've designed it such that we're going to provide an overview of some of the key evidence-informed principles and practices we believe can be supporting you in your work as tutors, working with pupils. We're absolutely not going to be telling you what to do. That's not what we're here to do tonight. We are absolutely born of the mind that evidence supplements experience. It doesn't supplant it. It builds on top and comes alongside experience. So we hope that comes across loud and clear. And we also want to locate tutoring within the National Tutoring Programme. And that's the first bit that I'm going to do. I'm going to just give you an outline of what we shared with the schools on Monday when we went through this with them. But first of all, I'm just going to outline the structure of the session. So we've planned it into small chunks. We appreciate it's a long session, but we've broken it into 6 chunks, as you see here. So in a moment, I'm going to launch into the first one about the National Tutoring Programme. Then we're going to hear from Melanie Moore, a head teacher from one of the schools in the Unity Schools Partnership, to give a short narrative of the perspective from her standpoint about the values that tutoring brings. Marc Rowland will then take on the banner on relationships and literacy. I'll come back in about a little bit about how people learn. We're going to take a break then, so a comfort break so people can step away, get a drink and stretch the legs. And just for 5 minutes before we come back for Anna Tapper, who's going to give an outline on foundations for numeracy. And then finally, we're going to round off with a shorter piece on scaffolding for self-regulation. We hope it builds together. It's designed to bring together some of the key principles we feel might be useful. Many you may have come across before, but hopefully it's resonating and bringing them back to the front of the mind. We're going to record it so you'll have access to it later on. Well, as we go through it, ask you to pause for thought to try to engage in some mental engagement, even though it's not face-to-face. We'll also share the links with you of anything that we have as we go forward in this over the coming weeks and months. So that's the plan, and I hope that is what you're looking forward to. Next 5 slides are just going to outline what we outlined on Monday with the schools approaching the National Tutoring Programme. I'll just give you a moment to read those 2 bits of information. So I hope you've heard about it already. I imagine you have because you joined this webinar. The National Tutor Programme is part of the government's response to COVID-19 lockdown and the loss of learning, etc., associated with that. It's a new ambitious programme that we are still getting more information from. So we're just making use of the opportunity to bring something to people who may be involved in the future as a tutor. Why use tutors? Well, we believe that there's clear high quality evidence demonstrating the potential of one-to-one and small group tuition. You know that probably because you're involved in it, I should imagine. One thing that would be really helpful, if you wouldn't mind doing, you should be able to see a question and answer button on your screen, on the controls. If you can, if you don't mind just putting into that, just typing in the role you have at the moment, the main role you have, whether it be teacher, TA, tutor, or other. If you don't mind just putting it in, we'll then just be able to get a sense of the audience as we go forward with this. So thank you for that. I can see some people doing that already. That'd be really helpful. Just the one word to say what you're doing. So why use tutors? There's evidence to say that it really can make a difference. Others will touch on this, but it's also about how it can be accessed by many, many more than it might have been accessed previously. The National Tutoring Programme will look to address this disparity of what has happened before and what we need right now. We shared with schools that some do's, we also shared some don'ts. Well, I'll just look at the do's here, give you a chance to have a look there. A number of these will be touched upon in a moment. But we really see the third one as a key one, about tuition as the opportunity to improve pupils as learners. You are aware of just how much schools have been providing in the process, and what you will do is if you are part of a tutor, you'll be adding on, you'll be supplementing what they do, and I know Melanie is going to talk about that in a moment. You'll be helping consolidate prior learning. That is what you'll be able to do, going alongside individuals or small groups. And we'll be looking at aspects of this later on in the session. So there's some clear ideas about what we were anticipating with schools, what tutors would do. The models of how they're going to do it and how you'll do it, they're yet to be created, because this is something that's evolving and will evolve with the practices and what we're allowed to do. At the moment, clearly there's a clear pieces around whether it's going to be face-to-face or online or whatever, but these things will become clearer. As soon as we get more clarity, we'll be sharing it with those who've registered with us, like you have already, just to keep updated of what's happening. We're going to be sharing best bets from evidence. This is the first of one piece. We want to intentionally support people going through into these roles, and we're going to make use of the resources that we use frequently as a research school. So we've got here the guidance reports. I hope you've seen some of them before. If you haven't, we'll certainly make sure the link is in the information we send you after this event. But the top row there, the suite of evidence guidance reports that support literacy from early years right the way through to secondary. I know Mark, my colleague, will pick up on this in a moment. Improving maths, the bottom left, from early years through to Key Stage 3. Really, really essential. There's some really interesting evidence about how maths and numeracy has been one of the key elements to bounce back elsewhere after certain degrees of interruption. And Anna Tapper will be taking that on in a moment. If you haven't seen them yet already, there's also some really good resources that the Education Endowment Foundation created in support of the current situation. So those support resources for schools and those resources to share with parents, once again, provide you as a tutor or a teacher or a TA with a resource that you can share and to bring alongside what you're doing already. We're also in future sessions going to be looking at positive learning behaviours, looking at where the role metacognition plays, the strategies for self-regulation and how they are going to be crucial in developing sustainable opportunities for children. How parental engagement, one of the real bonuses of what we've seen in many of our schools is how those strong relationships with parents have been made even stronger, and how that is going to be crucial, but how we make sure that is all the way across the board. Pupils with SEND, looking to make sure that we're addressing need where we have to. So we're going to be picking up on these in future pieces, not 2-hour-long sessions, but much shorter pieces. And we hope that should you feel interested, you'll join us for those as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass over to my colleague, Melanie Moore, and she's going to share an idea of her perspective from her situation as a head of a primary school. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate that. Hello, as Andy said, my name is Melanie Moore and I'm the head teacher at Ditton Lodge Primary School in Newmarket. I've been asked to share a head teacher's perspective about the role of tutoring to support our pupils. And as you're probably aware, lots of you are already in school. I can see from the question and answer sessions that you are aware that school throughout lockdown has been open for vulnerable and for key worker children. And from the 1st of June, schools open for all of reception, Year 1 and Year 6 pupils. And then from the 15th of June, open for some Year 10 pupils. Schools have continued to remain open, but under very different, sometimes challenging and ever-changing circumstances. And as schools fully open in September, we are really looking forward to welcoming all children back. But we are aware that each of our children will have had very different experiences, but not all of them bad. And for me, that's really, really important. Not all of them bad. But we are aware of children who've had really positive and enriching experiences during the last few months. But we are also aware that the experiences of our pupils have been varied. And we are already aware that there are gaps in pupils' learning, and we look to close those gaps to ensure that all of our pupils we are yet to see the full impact of these last few months on our pupils. But as Marc Rowland says, and I've stolen this one from you, Marc, so thank you very much, every interaction is an intervention. It is now my mantra, and anyone in school has heard me say this, and Andy likes to say this one as well. And we are ready to support our pupils, and we are ready to meet their needs exactly where they are. And the role of high quality tuition is to provide that additional support for those pupils who've missed out the most as a result of this disruption of COVID-19. As stated, it is not there to replace quality first teaching, but it's there to support the teaching that already happens, to support the fantastic teaching from our highly dedicated staffs already in schools, of maths and literacy, and especially as we look at the enriching opportunities for oracy, for vocabulary, as well as that development of reading, to support the work of our schools with metacognition, to help pupils grow an ever stronger relationship with learning. It's there to use evidence-based practice to support pupils to understand how they learn, to develop their confidence, to develop their resilience as learners. I know that Marc's going to talk about the role of a tutor is not going to be the same as you might have in your mind of what a tutor should be like. Those high quality tutor interactions through instruction and modelling the process of learning will be able to help address the individual needs of each of our pupils. And high quality tuition will supplement all of the work of our teachers to help families as well, to help families to support the learning of those pupils who need it most. And anyone who knows me knows about my very strong opinion of the significance of effective relationships. They are so key to the success of this programme, and I'm really excited that Marc is going to be able to talk to you and share about that later. We need to focus on those relationships, the relationships between school and tutor or coach, as well as the relationships between pupils and the tutor or coach, as well as families at home and schools, families at home and the tutor and coach. And I'm really excited that through the National Tutor Programme, tutors and coaches will be able to provide effective, intensive catch-up support to our pupils, working together with teachers, because those teachers will have identified specific need. And I'm excited about the opportunity that the programme gives to each of our learners. And as a head teacher, and I know that I speak for many people, that we look forward to working together as schools and tutors through this programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. I think you can absolutely tell the passion with which tutors are going to be met with from our schools, and I'm sure that is going to be going through. Now, in terms of next steps on, we're going to build on some of those strands that Melanie shared with us. So thank you, Melanie. Really appreciate you sharing that with us today. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Marc Rowland, who's going to take us on a narrative around identifying need and some of those key strands that he shared, that Melanie mentioned. Thank you, Marc.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Andy and Melanie. Talk about pupil need. I think it's fundamental that we get this right. And he talked about relationships there, and then he talked about improving the learner, and those are really critical sort of active ingredients about an effective approach around this agenda. So a starting point, and we need to spend time here actually, and this is a process, not an event, around identifying the needs of our pupils that are going to be participating in tuition. I think this perception around tutoring, isn't it, around the highest attainers. You've got that strong background knowledge, and this is about just getting them over the line around high stakes testing, 11 plus and the like. Well, actually, this is going to be something quite different, and maybe, and I'm generalizing here, but around supporting pupils with significant gaps in learning because of prior issues around attendance, around their relationships, high mobility, but gaps in learning around health issues, or indeed dispositions towards learning, lower levels of language. It's more complex. So our starting point and our ongoing focus needs to be properly identified need. And this already is something that progresses over time. So our strategy and our activity around tutoring needs to be rooted in assessment of pupils' needs, but also that ongoing dialogue between the teacher, the tutor, the pupil, and their family too. That needs to be a constant sort of cycle of effective communication. If we don't identify pupils' needs properly, what we'll lead into then is poorly identified activity. And just because of despite all of the efforts that we put in, we won't see the impact on those pupils that we'd like to have. And that is really, really problematic as well, particularly for those pupils that are putting that additional effort in. So our understanding needs to be rooted in diagnostic assessment, conversations, discussions, teacher voice, tutor voice, pupil voice, family voice as well. These things are going to be really, really important. It's going to be a little bit more complex, but spending time identifying that need is going to be of fundamental importance. One of the keys to this is going to be around building positive relationships, but also linked to pupils' language. The language gap here that particularly some of our least fortunate pupils experience is, there isn't a golden ticket around this agenda, but actually language is as close to anything that we've got around it. Poorer levels of oral language are a significant anchor on future attainment. Children's speech, communication and language needs, under the old 5A Starter C measure at GCSE, 15% of those pupils achieved good GCSEs, including English and maths. So a significant impact on future attainment. But it also links to pupils' vocabulary, their self-confidence, their ability to self-regulate, their ability to build friendships and relationships, their ability to self-regulate their cognition, their ability to self-regulate their emotions, the ability to pull together sort of background knowledge, the glue that makes learning stick in your lessons, and indeed in those tuition opportunities too. So language is the foundation stone of self-esteem. It's the foundation stone of educational achievement too. So it's absolutely critical that we get this right. Melanie talked a lot about relationships, and there's a sort of gem of a quote really in what she talked about, is that through this process, what we want to do is to give our pupils who have those gaps in learning a better relationship with learning. So we want to build relationships with families, we want to build relationships between the adults that have worked and get together on this agenda, tutors, teachers, better relationships between the pupils and those adults. But ultimately, we want to improve those pupils as a learner. And that, for me, is all about what inclusion is. That's it. Sometimes we have some pretty poor proxies for inclusion. I think things like pupils being in a lesson, pupils being supported by a staff member, pupils being busy and engaged in something, pupils with differentiated work. If our pupils that need tutoring get easier work, they're not going to catch up. What we need to be doing is improving them as learners, giving them that background knowledge, those skills to be able to participate in challenging tasks. That's the key to better self-confidence. Pupils completing work, that is a poor proxy for inclusion, particularly if they haven't been thinking hard as part of that process. Pupils being well liked, pupils working with people that had trained, those are poor proxies for inclusion. Better proxies are around relationships and high expectations, pupils participating in challenging work, teacher expertise, subject knowledge and inclusive pedagogy, and that is about linking together with the tutor to give pupils those learning opportunities, pupils having the background knowledge to be able to participate in their learning. So I think there's an interesting this isn't just about sort of catch up and pulling children up, but in some cases the most effective tuition will be around a pre-teach model, giving pupils the knowledge to be able to participate in their learning. It's about oral language strategies. Who is having those pupils with less well-developed language having the opportunities to talk and express and explain their ideas, which gives us assessments around their knowledge all the time that we can build on. You know, that is, you know, that for me is around inclusion. The language gap, I'd argue, is the attainment gap, and particularly when it's exacerbated by a social isolation gap, which has been the experiences of some of our more vulnerable pupils. These are not things that are associated with any particular label, but actually, you know, multiple studies highlight the impact of that sort of correlation between pupils from lower socioeconomic quintiles and lower levels of language then associated with conduct, behaviour, issues around focus and attention. So language is the key to this, and we can think about it as adults, can't we? That it's quite difficult to participate in an activity and exercise when you don't have a language comprehension to be able to participate. I certainly find it difficult anyway. So if we can tackle that, give pupils that language, we give them a better chance of success right across their school careers. So this is absolutely key to success around this, and it coupled with an agenda around better self-esteem, better self-confidence, better attention, better contributions. And I think tutoring really offers an opportunity to address those things. And I think looking at what Anna is going to say shortly will give you some really helpful practical examples around how that can work, particularly around mathematics. This is about opportunities, I think, the tutoring program, valuing pupils, valuing their contributions, but also assessment too. So about reading aloud, and then we can use things like the multidimensional fluency scale to assess children's fluency in their language, which will be really helpful as part of that feedback loop. Just more time to hear those children and build on what they're doing well, but address those gaps too. This can also link, and I'll shut up in a minute, I promise everyone, but it links to all aspects of school life. So I just want to touch on something that's so familiar to us, that everybody working in school around sort of, you know, the feedback that we get on our learning on a day-to-day basis, that if we don't have the language, then we'll do that sort of Graham Nussell thing from A Hidden Lives of Learners book around misinterpreting the messages that we're going to get. And those things can further impact on our self-esteem and self-confidence too. So language infiltrates everything that we do within school life. If we can tackle that, we give all of our pupils, irrespective of background barriers learning, a better chance of success. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Mark. Really helpful, and I really hope that that has resonated with people on the call. There's still clearly a lot of information to come through from the Department for Education about how this will work. Individual schools will decide whether they wish to take on the tutoring or not, and so there's lots of questions that we've yet to get answers to, and we're committing to sharing what information we do know with you as we go through the summer months and into the autumn term. This part here is designed just to consider how people learn. As I said, we've got a good range of people on the call tonight who this is their daily bread and butter. This is what we do, and this is how you do it. But I think it's really pertinent at this stage to calibrate, to revisit and remind ourselves of some of the key elements of learning. So I'm going to be looking at 4 things, just briefly going to look at learning, performance, memory and scaffolding. And those 4 things will join together, hopefully, just to provide an outline of some of the pieces that we need to be aware of as we go into just this next period of time around tutoring. It's what our teachers are doing, and therefore I think it's really useful to make sure that we're just starting again, just to recalibrate what we're talking about. Just while that slide is up there, just have a moment to consider, if you were asked to do this, how would you define learning? Have a moment to think about it for yourself. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to make our way through this. Maybe also think, why have I put the post-its up there? We can't use them. We use them so much in our face-to-face time, don't we? But in this virtual world, we can't use them, and I'm not technological enough to know how to do them virtually. But there we go. There is a reason why I put those 4 post-its up there. Okay, so let's have a look and see. All right. Some people far wiser than me, Kirshner, Sweller and Clark in 2006, put this together as their definition of learning. As a geographer, I always look to seek to get my definitions out early on. So learning is a change in long-term memory. I think it's really useful to consider that as a starting point. It starts to bring in the concept of memory, and we're going to explore a little bit about that in a moment. We all know, don't we, that learning is highly individual. It actually involves very different things for different people, but it also involves progressive change in what we know and can do. Mark has already mentioned about Graham Nuttall. If you haven't seen his book, Graham Nuttall's book, The Secret Lives of Learners, published in 2007, it really does open up so much, doesn't it, around the thinking about what this looks like from a pupil's perspective. His key point was thinking, if you want to understand teaching, you need to understand how children learn. And I think there's another real good point for why we come back to this. So there's a lot happened in the last 50 or 60 years of cognitive science and neuroscience, and more is becoming known all the time. What was thought to be unknown is starting to be known more about. And this bit at the bottom here that Rob Coe talks about, learning happens when people have to think hard. You know that as educational professionals, and I suppose this piece now, when we're considering tutoring, you're going to want to go alongside pupils to help them think hard, to help them really come to terms with some of the pieces they may have been struggling with or missed out on, or really want to drill down into to make sure they understand it even better. So learning is a change in long-term memory is where I'm starting from. And so the next part just starts to identify learning versus performance. I think when I try and think about learning, I'm often drawn back to my teenage years when I was learning to drive. I can absolutely remember thinking there's no way I'm ever going to be able to learn to drive because I'm right-handed and I have to change gear with my left. Absolutely remember that. But if I now think about it, I approached it as an absolute novice. I then, over time, practiced, got instruction, got expert instruction, and now, all these years later, I do it unconsciously. I try not to do it unconsciously because I actually want to make conscious about the decisions I make when I'm driving. But the idea about learning versus performance. So learning is about a change in what you are able to do over time. Performance is getting from A to B. So on the left-hand side here, you've got a map of going from London to Edinburgh. So that journey, if I wish to go and take that journey, I would need to make that journey through those routes there. I'd need to decide which routes I'm going on and take it. If I didn't have my sat-nav, and those were the days when I didn't, I'd have to take a map with me. I'd actually have to navigate and decide, well, is this road looking like it's the right one? Am I following the right route? Do I need to stop, change direction, etc.? So that's one way of thinking about learning how to go about getting from A to B. The sat-nav on the right-hand side, though, right now I could plug in to go from London to Edinburgh and literally just follow it without having to think hard at all. I'd like to think my thinking is about looking at the road in front of me and thinking about the conditions, but it's probably not going to be quite the same. When I get out of the car in Edinburgh, will I even know the roads I took? And so this piece around learning versus performance, it's really interesting, I think, for us to consider that when we're thinking about the needs of the children we're working with. So learning is about that change in long-term memory, and it's going to be influenced by a number of pieces here. So this bit here, I hope you've come across it before, but I think it's really timely to bring it up again. It's a simple model of memory brought up after Daniel Willingham, the work of Daniel Willingham. Another great book, if you haven't seen it come across yet, Why Don't Students Like School? Great title, really, really useful insights from cognitive science and neuroscience. It all starts on the left-hand side here. Hopefully you can see my mouse here, about environment. It does all start with environment. It's what we attend to in that environment. So hopefully right now you're in your own environment and you're going to be considering paying attention to this. You're going to be affected by external elements. So my face in the video camera, the noise of my voice, what's happening outside outside the window. You can also have distractions. Maybe your mobile phone is going off, but those sort of pieces are going to affect your attention all from the environment. You're also going to have the internal elements. This is the end. I don't know what your day has had in it already, but that attention is going to be affected by what is happening, has happened previously, and what is going to happen in the future. So we start with the environment and consider that. Now, your role as a tutor is obviously going to be considering, what is the environment for my tutoring? Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be online? How is it going to be managed in that way? So there's a piece around knowing the environment we're stepping into that can help us in that way. We move on from there to thinking about working memory. And working memory is the site of awareness and thinking. It's where we are having conscious and effortful thinking. Conscious and effortful thinking. Going back to Rob Coe, it's we're thinking hard. Now, we use working memory all the time. It's ever present. There are some issues with it though. It's got a very limited capacity and it's a temporary jotter. Now, maybe you've thought back to the pictures of the Post-its. There's some really interesting, I love an analogy, and Gathercole and Alloway, who I'll reference later on, use this as their analogy. It's like a Post-it. You've only got a certain amount of space on a Post-it. You can actually get different size Post-its. I'll come to that in a minute, but you're going to get a certain amount of information on a Post-it. That Post-it will peel off. If you put it on a wall and you leave it, it will peel off over time. You'll lose it over time unless you do something with it. You have to do something with it to make it useful. So the analogy for me of a Post-it note and working memory works really well. I'll say that bit about different size Post-its. You've got the really small ones that you can put inside a book to mark your page. You've even got the A3 ones that, A5 ones. I haven't seen A3 ones, but A5 ones. Different people have different size working memories. That's really important for us to be aware of. And the second part that comes from that is it's not age related. And there'll be children in our primary schools who have a greater working memory capacity than those in our secondary schools. It doesn't necessarily go with age. It's a fascinating piece I'm learning more and more about, but I think as an educator, it's really, really important when we consider going alongside pupils in whichever way. So we've got the working memory. It's limited in capacity and it's temporary. We're going to come back to, because what then happens is that we as human beings, we also then rely on our long-term memory. The long-term memory piece is where we have our factual and procedural knowledge. It's our store. It's limitless. It really has some amazing powers, but it works in many different ways. The working memory links into the long-term memory. That long-term memory is that store. It's a huge capacity, and it's organized around mental models and schemas. Our role as educators is surely then to be supporting the development of those mental models and those schemas so that pupils can be informed, so that they can rely more on their long-term memory and less on their working memory. The more that they can have within their long-term memory, the less they have to be tussling with in problem solving. So part of our work as educators is to support the learning from the transferring from working memory into learning through to long-term memory. But remembering it's got to start with attention. We've got to have them attending to what we're thinking about, working hard with the thinking and taking it into the learning. The next part then, we've got to actually retrieve it back, because from the long-term memory, we're going to be retrieving it back. That act of retrieval is really important. So you have those pieces there. Now, this the piece here, forgotten, bottom left. Forgetting is actually a really important part of learning. We know that, and it's just really useful to come back to it. We will forget things from our working memory. Ask me 5 minutes time what I talked about 5 minutes ago, I won't tell you. I will have forgotten the details. Ask me what I did yesterday, I'm struggling. Ask me what last week, I might struggle even more. However, there'll be pieces that I will have gone into my long-term memory that I can use. But long-term memory, if we don't use it, we will lose elements of it. We'll lose the speed at which we can recall things. I'm doing this at pace, but essentially This model really, I think, helps us in considering what we do and how we do it, importantly, how we do it. I love the quote at the bottom. Memory is the residue of thought. If what we direct and inspire children to think about, we have a greater opportunity to see that move into working memory and then translate that through activity, through learning into long-term memory mental models. And Melanie talked about metacognition, the process of how we go about learning as well. So I've stayed on this slide a bit for a while, but just have a think on it before I move on to the next slide, which shows it in a slightly different way. Question just to yourself, how much of that resonates with you? Is it something that actually is worth dusting off to consider your role as a tutor? Just have a moment to think about it. Okay. I've already mentioned I'm a geographer, so I love a diagram as well. I love the work of Oliver Caviglioli and his work at the top left you can see. We will share these slides, as I say, so we'll have them for you. Oliver Caviglioli has taken Willingham's memory model and put it together as a dual-coded image. So for some of you, the sheet before might have actually been absolutely spot on. This one here is just exactly the same, isn't it, if you think about it? Challenge yourself, just have a think. Could you simply now narrate from environment through to long-term memory? Just have a go at thinking about what that would be, moving from environment through to long-term memory. Just talk to yourself if you don't mind talking to yourself. Have a look, have a go, just a moment. Okay, for those of us working in schools, the early career framework right now is drawing back to these principles that we need to be maintaining. So even if we're not thinking about tutoring, hopeful time, intentional time thinking about learning and what it means as a teacher is going to be helpful as we go forward. So thank you. Thank you for staying with us. I can still see all of you staying with us, so thank you for that. It's our venture into a new place for ourselves, but thinking, you're paying attention, thank you. What you're doing, your working memory is being affected by all that's around you, but hopefully we're taking some of it into your conscious thinking. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next piece here, because the issue with working memory, if I just go back here, this piece here, going into working memory and coming out to support, so going through into support long-term memory. The issue here is that only small amounts of short-term information are processed in the working memory. The average person can only hold about 4 chunks of information in their working memory at once. Now that's really important, because if we start to think about presenting information, we've got to present it in a way that is easily chunked. We have tried tonight to chunk what we do. We probably wouldn't advise doing 2 hours every time, but we just wanted to provide a big overview for this. So when we're thinking about presenting information, thinking about how much capacity the pupil has. The second one, the large amounts of information are stored semi-permanently in the long-term memory. So us thinking about how those models fit together and how the schemas are supported in organising and storing knowledge is going to be a really helpful piece to help pupils understand how they can bring to organise their thinking. There's a great book on my bookshelf called Connecting the Dots by Tricia Taylor. If you haven't seen it, it's a really useful document, really great book. And she talks about tidying the wardrobe. You know, one of the things we can do is help pupils tidy the wardrobe with their learning. And that sort of piece there is about how we can be informing their use of knowledge and their use of what they know. So we've said the third point here, working memory can be overloaded. We've got to be aware of that. I'm trying to be aware of that right now. And I'm trying to be intentional with the words I use and the images I use. The good news is that working memory overload can be prevented. We can work to try to make it less loadsome for people. And this is the work of the New South Wales group here in 2017. And we'll provide links to this. If you haven't seen it already, it's linked to cognitive load theory, but it's a really useful document that you can use as a teacher or educator. So just drawing to think about where we head with this. So other pieces we're really keen to utilize is evidence-informed approaches such as Rosenshine's principles of instruction. So from 2012, and these are here's the individual paper about Rosenshine, but in it it's about how information can be presented, how instruction of new material can be designed so that we can stand a greater chance of activating thinking and supporting working memory and developing the links into long-term memory. So this is just 3 of the 10 ways that Rosenshine has evidence to make it better. Presenting new materials in small steps, chunking. The small steps, thinking when we can then move on and master. Providing models, really powerful, isn't it? Modeling, understanding how we use those worked examples and thinking how we can inspire through our words and our actions others to understand how they can improve what they're doing. And the third one about scaffolds for difficult tasks. That's where I'm heading for the last session we do later on. Is the scaffolds are temporary supports, aren't they, to assist learning. They can include modeling. We'll talk about thinking aloud, and we're part of supporting our learners as they go forward into what they do. So Rosenshine's principles of instructions aren't everything, but they certainly provide some really helpful thoughts to resonate with what we're talking about long-term and working memory. Now, I've referenced this document here, top right. It's a really good read. It's a very simple read, not that it needs to be, but it's backed up with huge amounts of evidence. But Professor Gathercole and Dr. Alloway, if you haven't come across their work or this guide, it's absolutely invaluable, I think. It really starts to unpack working memory. And the more myself and colleagues think about this, it's one of the key things that is both a block, but also a trampoline into learning. If we understand it better, then we're going to make sure our instruction and our classroom environments and our tutoring is going to be even better. Tracy Alloway has written large numbers of books increasing on this, and they're all available. They're certainly well worth dipping into if you haven't come across them yet. What we'll also send, so I'll send a link to this. We'll also send you a link to this Making Connections document on the left-hand side. What we've done as a research school, we're supporting the signposting to evidence-informed practice and resources where possible. We've basically tried to put on one side of A4, chunking it into a way to find resources. So you'll see that in here, when you get the link, you just have to click on the link here and you'll be taken to this classroom guide. You'll click on this link and you'll be taken to the piece around cognitive load theory. Some blogs that we've found useful. So we'll send these on to you in a hope that actually they can add on and supplement all that you're learning about and all that you use at the minute. The Research School Network is that, it's a network. It's about getting people involved in sharing where we can. So if, as in all the other parts of the outcomes of this evening or today's session, you want to actually consider supporting some of these and sharing some of your own pieces, we're only too pleased to do that. Creating a network of tutors who are evidence-informed is really what we're hoping to achieve within this. What I'm going to suggest now is we're going to move on to the bit that has a big cup of tea on it. We'll come back in 5 minutes' time and Anna will take us through a bit about the foundations for numeracy.
Hello, my name's Anna Tapper and I am the Primary Maths Advisor for Unity Research School. And it's really great because everything I've been hearing from Melanie and Marc and Andy links brilliantly with what I'm going to say to you today. So it's like a few from me. And really this is a bit more of a subject specific work that I'm going to talk to you about now. And I know we've got so much expertise in the room, which is fantastic, and experience among us. But like Andy said before, it's good to go over and refresh and remind ourselves of some of the basics of teaching maths, so that when you're working with pupils, whether it's in small groups or one-to-one, you've got those a really strong understanding of the basics of what they'll be doing in class, to make sure that what you're doing is supporting and developing that as well. And as Melanie said, it's about working together as a team. So we're really excited for this to be happening. I'm trying to change page. There we go. So we're looking at, first of all, what a mastery approach to maths is. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you work in a primary school, so you're already really on board with mastery in maths. But for those of you who don't, or for those of you who haven't really experienced maths teaching since you were at school, maths has changed quite a lot in the way that we teach it and the way that children learn. And we're taking more of an evidence-based approach now of how we can support all children to achieve. And if we think about how maths may have been taught, let's say 10 years ago or so, you would have walked into a classroom and seen a group of children working at the age-related expectations. So let's say we were in year 5, we would have had a group of children working on a year 5 curriculum. But you may also have seen a group of children working on a year 6 curriculum, because maybe they were doing really well, so they got moved up a bit. And you may have seen a group of children working on a year 4 curriculum, or even a year 3, possibly even some children working below that. And the mastery approach changes that. So what it does is it gives every child the opportunity to achieve to their age-related expectations. It's an inclusive approach. And rather than limiting children by saying this is where you're working at, and we're only going to give you this level of work, this lower level of work, you give children the opportunity to work to where they should be, but give them all of the support that they need to get there. And it's interesting the way that Marc was talking about support, because that doesn't necessarily mean an adult working with them. There's lots of different ways that we can support children, and part of your role as a tutor may be to be alongside them, but actually just being alongside them gives them that extra confidence and suggesting things, rather than working directly and really closely with them. So a mastery approach comes from the sort of Singapore and Shanghai, and it's now come into the way that we teach in the UK. And really, I kind of like to think of it as, I know Andy was talking about his analogies, but I quite like analogies too. And I was thinking about MasterChef. So in MasterChef, you have these people that are, well, especially celebrity MasterChef, you have these people that are really pretty useless at cooking, and but maybe they're not that experienced. And they go alongside an expert chef. And the expert, the first thing they do is they really calmly show them how to do it. And they cook this amazing dish and say, this is what you're going to end up with. And they show them step by step by step, really small steps for them to get there. And then the celebrity will work alongside them. And they'll take those steps, and the chef will intervene when they need to, but they also step back and they let them make a few mistakes, because we learn from mistakes as well. And then eventually they move away so that the celebrity is left to cook on their own. And to begin with, maybe it goes a little bit wrong, and the chef will come back in and give them some extra support. But eventually you see the celebrity cooking these amazing meals that they never thought they'd be able to make, and they're doing it with automaticity. And that's what we're looking for with our children, is that we're there to support them, we're side by side with them, but we're not doing it for them. And as in a mastery approach to maths, we gradually remove those levels and those scaffolds of support so that they're able to do that on their own, and they have automaticity to it. They have a really strong understanding of mathematical language and can explain what they're doing really clearly. They have a deep and rich understanding of all the different connections in maths. And so that's what we're aiming for with the children that we're working with. And that's achieved through exploration, through clarification of what they're doing, through practice and application over time. We're not expecting the children that you're most likely going to be working with are those with those really big gaps, and we're not expecting them to suddenly catch up and be masters, but we are expecting them to have that level of challenge to allow them to get there. As Marc was saying, if we're giving them the easy work, they're not going to catch up. We've got to give them that level of challenge as well. So one of the key things that schools use is a CPA approach. And this is really it's actually from Brunner, so it is a European approach originally, but it was taken on board by teachers, educationalists in Eastern countries, so Shanghai and Singapore. But the CPA approach starts off with the concrete, so that children can actually build the concepts they're trying to learn. And here you can see they've just got, we're doing a simple addition, but you can see the 2 parts, the 3 and the 2, and they've put those multi-linked together to make 5. Once children are really secure in their understanding, in that concrete, and they can build the maths, they then will move on to the pictorial. So we'll have the representation, what that could look like through a drawing. And this is quite a formalised drawing of a bar model, but children can actually represent their work in many different ways, particularly younger children. Any sort of representation, any sort of picture to show their mathematical understanding, the evidence shows has a really big impact on progress. So encouraging children to draw maths is a great way in for those that are a little bit stuck. And the abstract stands on the shoulders of the concrete and pictorial. So together, those elements support the understanding in the abstract. And of course, that's what we're aiming for. We want children to be able to solve mathematical problems quickly. We want them to be able to be fluent in the way that they're working, and we want them to use algorithms efficiently. Getting the multi-link out every time they need to solve a problem isn't going to help them, but we want a change from the way that a generation ago children learnt maths. When I was at school, more than a generation ago, I had no idea, I wasn't taught the meaning of what I was doing. I was just told, this is the way we do it. You don't need to know why. I was the annoying child with my hands up. You don't need to know why, you just need to know this is how we solve it. And we don't want that anymore. We want children to ask why, and we want to be able to explain why, so that it makes a greater connection to their long-term memory, so they can use and apply the mathematics in different ways. So what we're looking at is evidence-informed tutoring. And really, I'm going to talk you through this paper that came out a while ago now from the Education Endowment Foundation. They've also released one on early years to Key Stage 1. And some of the recommendations overlap as well. And we're going to look at the key recommendations that are going to be useful to you as a tutor. The first one is using assessment. Let's go back to what Marc was saying. Assessment is fundamental. Identifying the need is really going to be key with these children. And as he said, the tutoring for this programme is going to be very different from the tutoring that you may normally undertake. This is about children with high levels of need, with large and possibly longer term gaps. So we are looking at using diagnostic assessments. Schools will be using those, teachers will be using them for themselves anyway. We'll be looking at the pupil, parent and teacher voice together to identify where those needs are. And then feedback to pupils is key. So feedback should be specific, it should be clear. Rather than a well done, it's about saying, well done, you knew that 1,999 was only one away from 2,000, so you added on 2,000 and took one off. Fantastic. That feedback then supports a child in their mathematical development. But it should be given sparingly. And teachers should know and address misconceptions. So part of the support that we can offer is a document which will identify some of the key misconceptions for each area of mathematical understanding. And that will support you with helping those children with those gaps that they have. Recommendation 2 has the strongest bank of evidence behind it for any of the recommendations in this guidance report and in the early years and Key Stage 1 guidance report. That using manipulatives is key to developing children's conceptual understanding. We've talked about this in when we looked at the CPA approach, and really this is the thing that will support those learners to make a difference. It will make a difference in supporting those learners. And there's a misconception around manipulatives that this is really for early years and Key Stage 1, where we see them used really effectively. But actually the evidence shows that manipulatives can be used with a great impact for pupils in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 and beyond. Given that some of the pupils you'll be working with in Key Stage 3 will be those working below expectations, the manipulatives are going to be a tool that you'll return to over and again. And there's a wide range of manipulatives available. It's important to choose the right one for the concept. So not just, you can't use any manipulative, it needs to be the one that actually really exposes the maths for them. And we can give you guidance on that as well. Recommendation 3 talks about solving problems. I'm just going to talk about this really briefly, but it links nicely to what Andy was saying, the work of Rosenshine about using worked examples. And they specifically outline worked examples as an effective model for solving problems. By that we mean a question, a problem where you actually go through and you show the answer to the children. So what they're doing is they're not having to think about the maths, their working memory isn't split by trying to remember the mathematical facts they need for the problem. They're actually focused on the stages and steps that you go through to solve a problem. And bar modelling is a very effective tool for problem solving, and it links really tightly to the Singapore approach. Many of your schools will be using schemes that use bar modelling as part of it. And again, we have some CPD that is available that you can look at for bar modelling as well, and some worked examples that I've gone through that you can look at to support you in your understanding of that. Now, you know, solving problems is part of the 3 key areas of the national curriculum. You have fluency, problem solving and reasoning. And in a mastery approach, number takes key over everything else. So although it follows the national curriculum, number has more emphasis. Most likely this is an area you will be working on. You have a unique opportunity when you're working with these pupils because of the close nature of that work, because the one-to-one or very small group, you have the chance to really develop the rich network of mathematical knowledge. Very often with learners who are lower attaining in maths, what we see is that they understand one area of maths and they may understand another area of maths, but they don't see how those are connected. So they may know some mathematical facts, they might know some times table facts, but they don't then apply and see how that connection of times table facts links to fractions and how that links to ratio. Developing those links really supports children to understand what they're doing in mathematics, but also to make accelerated progress. So that opportunity to explore those links is crucial. Marc talked a bit about motivation and how we can support learners and the importance of relationships. And really this is what I think this is about. It's about developing strong relationships with those children that you're working with. And as part of that, the independence and motivation comes in through self-regulation. So although these pupils may be in a position where they need additional support, actually encouraging pupils to take responsibility for their own learning and playing an active role in that learning is key. We want children to enjoy maths. We want them to be motivated by the power of maths, and it's very likely that the children you're working with won't be. So that relationship with you as their tutor, to let them see this as an important time, a special time to really focus on what they're doing, is a strength that you can bring to this role. One of the things that works particularly well to develop independence if pupils are not yet at that stage where they can self-regulate and take that responsibility is modelling your own thinking. So rather than saying when we talk about self-regulation, when a child is stuck, rather than giving them a way in and maybe doing part of the problem with them, an approach to that could be that you would say, okay, let's think about what you've been doing in class. How does that link to what we're doing here? Is it possible that drawing a picture would support your understanding in this area? Another way is to model your own thinking. So if a child is completely stuck, saying to them, all right, well, this is how I would do it, and solving the problem, but rather than talking through the maths, talking through your thinking. So often we model maths, and actually it's not that element that needs modelling, it's the thinking. They don't know how to problem solve, they don't know how to reason. That's the harder part. So it's the thinking that we need to focus on. And I've skipped out number 6. And finally, we're going to look at structured interventions. It's very likely that the school you'll be partnered with will be following a scheme of some sorts. And they may want, and possibly a textbook scheme, and they may want you to work alongside that scheme using the same resources. Or it's possible that they may have a scheme that they already use to support children to close those gaps, and they'd like you to run that. So the key for schemes and interventions is seeing how they link to whole class learning. So that communication with the teacher and with the pupil and the parent, the 4 of you together, is really going to be key in supporting children to draw those links and close those gaps. And we know that the pupils that we have may not want to come out. They may, and I think this is really key about planning as well, is making sure that, and this isn't a question for you, but making sure that the timings of the interventions is right, so that they're not missing out on something that, you know, is a subject they really excel in or that they really love. But interventions should motivate pupils, should be something that they want to go and do. And mathematical games are a fantastic tool to doing that, and they're a great way for developing fluency as well. So what support is going to be available for you as tutors? Well, there's resources that I can share with you on my YouTube channel, where I have worked examples of bar modelling. These are some questions I've taken from White Rose that pupils have found particularly tricky, and then I've shown how you could solve them using a bar model. I also have calculation policy videos. So I am just a primary maths advisor, so they're just for primary, but they would certainly work for some of your Key Stage 3 pupils as well. And I'm in the process of creating videos that use manipulatives to show how you can teach different mathematical concepts. And some of those would work for Key Stage 3 as well. So there's things that you can refer to and that you can go back to. And, you know, really this is about supplementing and supporting the fantastic work that our teachers are doing in schools. And it's great that we've got so many people on here with the experience, and since you're still here, the enthusiasm to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Really, really helpful. I'll just give people a moment to consider what they're taking away from your session there, and while I just change the slides, but really valuable. I'll pick up on a few elements for sure. Okay, thank you for staying with us. We've got this last session now, so we're up to number 6. So we tried to chunk it together to grow themes that have spread through, and hopefully you'll hear again that those elements Anna was talking about problem solving, developing the learner, least help first, they're going to be picked up on now. And there's some really interesting questions coming through. We will commit to making sure we get answers to those as we can. When I sum up at the end, I'm just going to outline there's still a lot of things we don't know about this program, and I'll just I'll outline that when we get to the end there. Okay, so launching into this final section. So this is about scaffolding for self-regulation. We're going to draw upon one particular tool that is really, really useful in exemplifying what Rosenshine shares for scaffolds for difficult tasks and modelling. So Anna's just talked about the power of modelling, and the other piece I'm going to link into here is about scaffolding. So drawing on those pieces, we're going to use this particular framework. We sent it as a link in the oops, that's gone back. Not sure why that's happened. I sent it as a link to in the previous joining instructions. It's drawn out of the EF guidance report for making best use of TAs, but that itself comes from work of these are the three, Bazanket, Bradford and Webster. It's fundamentally about something that almost seems counterintuitive, least help first. We all came into education, no doubt, to make a difference, to help people to get even better at what they do. But this least help first framework is something that has been seen in recent years really to make a significant difference to the interactions between teaching assistants and pupils. But really importantly, it doesn't stop there with the teaching assistant, does it? It absolutely has to be whole culturally piece with teachers as well. And what we've been working with is hubs of schools working on this as an approach for the strategic deployment of TAs, and how this particular framework informs teacher development, TA development, and also pupil development in their learning. So we're going to use it because I think a number of us feel that it's got a lot of reference to the roles that you will be playing as you go alongside pupils in their learning. So but essentially, it's about growing independence. As you go up from the bottom of this inverted triangle, you see pupils showing greater independence. So at the top end here, they'd be self-scaffolding. At the very bottom end, they'd be being corrected. As you go down this, you start to see that there'd be more help from the TA. So self-scaffolding by its notion doesn't require any particular input from an adult. Prompting, a little bit more. Cluing, a little bit more specific. Oops, sorry. Modelling, and then correcting is what has more and more input from the TA or the adult. So I'm going to change to talking about the adult now as opposed to the TA. It comes across. So we're going to just look at these as the last part of the session then. We're just going to identify these particular elements and think about how they come alongside what you do as a tutor. So first of all, self-scaffolding. At the top of the framework is self-scaffolding. It's the ability to be able to work through a problem independently, a task independently, isn't it? It's using strategies that pupils have already used before. As a tutor, as a teacher, as an adult, you'd be listening really carefully at what the pupils are saying, watching what they're doing, and seeing how they're self-scaffolding. Our role as educators is then to consider, have they got enough to self-scaffold, or do they actually need some help in the next steps on? Self-scaffolding involves three things really: planning how to approach a task, the problem solving during the task, and also then reviewing the success at the end of that task, to think about the strategies that we used. Now that is exemplifying metacognitive approaches. So if you haven't come across it, the EF guidance report on metacognition, self-regulated learning is a great place to pick that up in, and we'll be sharing further resource on that in the future. So self-scaffolding is where we should be hoping to get to, but clearly it's not always going to be the case. But when we see self-scaffolders, yeah, I'd imagine that we're all self-scaffolders in most things we do, although as Anna says, put people in different situations of they're not used to and they're a novice, it's not so easy. So I just move forward. But we might put things in order. We might make a list. We might draft a content. We might look at a previous example that we've used. Pupils might ask peers. They might think, well, who could I ask to help me? That's self-scaffolding, self-starting, getting yourself going. And thinking about that, a good strategy is often just to watch, to listen, to see whether that happens in place. Next up, if that's not the case, and that's often not the case for all of us, we have been in a situation where we're novices and we just don't know what we don't know. Prompting is the next level up in terms of what an intervention, or what we as adults can do. As Melanie talked about, every interaction is an intervention. The interaction we provide then as a prompt is going to have some impact. But prompting is what we would try to do to encourage the next step on. It might be that it's actually an action. It's something you might say, or a gesture you might give. It's going to be something that actually encourages the pupils to draw upon prior learning. So they've got it within them somewhere. You just want to try and prompt them to get to it. I think there are 3 types of prompting. Saying nothing. The power of silence is really useful. Verbal prompts like we're doing here, so considering what we say and how we say it. And also gesture. Now that's harder because we're working 2D. One of the questions that's come up is about whether the tutoring is going to be online or face-to-face. We just don't know, do we? Because it's going to very much depend on, number one, if a school takes up tutoring and decides to do it, how the school wishes to do that, and what happens in terms of the directives we get from the DfE and the government about what is allowed and what's possible within the bubbles of education we're working in at the moment. So prompting is talking about saying nothing. Wait time is really important. Those of us in classrooms, we're thinking, how much time do we give to waiting? If a question is worth asking, we need time to let it consider and rest. 10 seconds can actually seem like an eternity, but for someone trying to think about it, it's really, really important. Verbal prompts and gestures. So within it, those sort of pieces about prompting might be things like, what's your plan? What do you think you could do next? Is that useful? Maybe that sort of thing. So that will be a prompt. Moving on, if prompt's not working, and we've all been in those situations ourselves, we can't be prompted, or those we're working with, the prompt isn't working. Cluing is the next version, the next piece up. So cluing really is starting to think about, if you're unable to self-scaffold and prompts aren't helping you, we move to the next layer about cluing. And a clue is about giving a pupil a piece of information that helps them move forward. We might start with a small clue, and that might get to be bigger clues. Now, I think cluing is trickier because cluing actually is more reactive. That bit about prompting, we could almost have a set of questions and prompts ready. What's your plan? What do you do next? What have you done before? But cluing actually requires to consider what is actually been happening at the moment. Clues need to be specific to the task, don't they? So in that way, cluing is a little bit more tricky, but you might just say, what goes in what happens next in this particular piece of mathematics? What would you put in that particular piece of multiplication? So cluing is the next piece on, and often the trickiest one, because modelling is the next piece here, and I think it's probably the strongest one that I'd move on to. So modelling is where we're really making sure we're giving pupils opportunity to see an expert in practice. We see it time and time again in schooling, don't we, that actually the power of being shown how to do something, Anna talked about it, the power that models bring, because you're actually watching someone, as she talked about MasterChef, that piece of watching someone do it, hearing them talk it through is really, really powerful. So in terms of modeling, it's that piece around the commentary, the narrative you give, or the actual doing, actually showing it. One of the most powerful things I was doing as a maths teacher was using a visualizer and showing pupils actually my hand doing the writing, showing my work, my crossings out, my workings out, seeing where I went wrong, seeing how I set it all out, so that they were really clear on what mathematical notation should look like. Not assuming they can do it, but showing them. And one way of modeling is really making sure that that is in place. It's really important, isn't it, that models are something that in themselves are trying to support them going forward. We can't just do it for them. there's a contract within modelling, isn't there? I'll do it, we do it, and then you do it. The I, we, you. I'm going to do it. I'm going to model it for you. I'm going to talk it through. I'm going to open up my thinking. I'm going to talk it through. I'm going to show you with my pen. I'm going to do it in front of you. We're then going to do it together. So I'm going to start and you're going to continue. We're going to take it in turns to narrate what I just did. I might do it alongside a worked example. And then the final part of that contract is you're going to have a go at it yourself on an example that's probably, if not the same, very, very similar. So that modelling is a piece that has to have actual short, clear models working. It needs to put the pupils trying things for themselves straight away. But we really do feel that modelling is one of those pieces that can be empowering for pupils to become and have stronger relationships with learning themselves. So modelling there is something that we feel has got power behind it. And I'm sure that you've experienced that yourself and you've probably used it in your classrooms. If you haven't, there's some really supportive blogs around modelling, the I, we, you techniques around it. And they're not for two reasons, I'd say. One is for the content. So if it is a maths problem or an English problem or a geography problem or a science problem, modelling the content, the language of the subject is going to be really powerful. Linking back to Marc's piece, hearing someone use the academic register of science or the academic register of drama or whatever it is we're going into is really powerful. And that might be one of the key things that pupils have missed in this lockdown. They've not had that rich narrative of the subject if they haven't had the live lessons. So there's a piece there around the modelling there of the content. The second piece is about the process. When we're shown how something could happen, we're probably better able to do it ourselves. And we can give that gift of understanding how to do something rather than just the what we do. So this is that metacognitive piece around the modelling of how to plan, how to do the piece and how to reflect on it at the end. And that reflection is almost a given. It's such a freebie at the end, but at the end of a session, what have we achieved then today? Where do you have to think really hard? Where did you overcome a problem? And how are you going to take that forward next time? Next time when you're in school tomorrow, how's that going to make you an even better learner? There was something that when Anna was talking, I just jotted down. There's a piece around achievement and motivation. I'm reading some interesting pieces around that, the evidence behind what leads to what. Motivation doesn't necessarily lead to achievement. It's the other way around. Achievement leads to motivation. If we feel we can do something and we have this sense of achievement, we're able to motivate ourselves even better. So our gift as educators should surely then be to actually make sure that we've set the opportunities for pupils to experience achievement. And in a very isolated or very specific focus, a tutor is in a very clear place to do that, working alongside the school with those pieces. So modelling is something that really I feel and we feel has a real place to play. Prompting, cluing, modelling, it's getting more and more input from the adult to get to the correcting, the final part. And there's absolutely got to be a place for correcting because we can't see errors go by. And sometimes it is what needs to happen. That might be really small corrections, but really thinking carefully. Marc mentioned it, Anna mentioned it, and thinking very carefully how we give that feedback. Feedback is very personal, isn't it? And we just need to be mindful of when we're establishing relationships with pupils and their families, that they understand that we're in this to make them better, help them get better. So that correcting is absolutely understood to be a key part of the learning within it. But the sense of least help first. You start up here in the prompting, cluing, modelling. And that's something we found really, really helpful. If it's something that's of interest, we'll hopefully do some more pieces on it. You can download the handy summary sheet. I've already linked it to you in the joining instructions here. But you've got this summary sheet from the EF website. You just have to follow these pieces, but we'll make sure that that comes to you in a link. And you'll see it. There's some helpful hints here about what it is. And you can use that. I've known teachers have that on their desk. There's a piece here, I've got a lanyard here, one of the lanyards that comes from the schools that use it. The great piece is when pupils see this used day in, day out by teachers and TAs, the interactions become more of the pupil saying, you're giving me a prompt there, you're giving me a clue. Can you give me a clue, miss? Can you give me a clue, sir? And what you start to see, it becomes a cultural piece. And that's what Marc was talking about the culture of this. So within scaffolding, this particular model isn't the only one, but it's one model we feel has got some weight behind it and some evidence behind it. We hope it's been useful to you in giving a sense of it. What I might just do is I'm going to round off in one moment, but we've covered quite a lot within a short space of time. Maybe just think of, like you've done already, put into the questions anything, a reflection that you're taking away. Here's a little takeaway again. The takeaway that you're taking from Anna and or me at this last couple of sessions, and all I'll then do in 2 minutes is round off with a sense of what happens next. Thank you. Helps if I unmute myself. Thank you. Really, really interesting to see what feedback is coming in, and some brilliant observations, and we really thank you for taking the time to do this. Pieces around how it resonates with what you're doing in your current practice, that's fantastic, and we would absolutely say, someone said there's lots to take away. There is. And what I'd urge, and I imagine Anna and Marc and Joe would be nodding at the same time, don't try and do this all at once. Rosenshine's principles, for example, aren't to be done every session, every day. They're to inform, and we make a judgment about what we use and when we use it. So think about carefully, considering what is put in place. But this piece that keeps coming up about how pupils can be helped to develop their independence. If there's one thing that we can do as a gift, well, there's a couple of things. Number two, first one, Marc is always passionately talking about, if we can help pupils read and read with confidence, then they will read for enjoyment. They won't read for enjoyment if they can't read. So there's a key piece around the importance of helping around reading and being an example of reading. The second one is about general strength of relationship to learning. If we can be supporting that, that is going to only accent what the schools are doing themselves. So thank you for what you've shared there already. We will make sure that we send you links from this. We'll get this video put into shorter pieces and sent to you in time. We'll just give us a couple of days to do that. In terms of next steps, I've just jotted down here some pieces. There's a Donald Rumsfeld quote that I've found fascinating for a number of years now. There are known knowns. There are known unknowns, there are unknown unknowns. And that it's not very helpful, but I think it is in this case. The known knowns. There are funds going to be made available for schools to fund tutoring for pupils that need it most. Firstly. Secondly, there's an absolute appetite from many schools to make use of this. Thirdly, there's evidence-informed principles that can and should support evolving practice for tutoring. That's where evidence comes alongside. In times of uncertainty, it can be drawn upon. Fourthly, and Mark mentioned this, Anna's mentioned it, is about partnership. It's going to be a partnership between the pupil, the school, the family, the tutor, and maybe us if you decide that you want to continue alongside us working to develop your own skills and practices. So I think those are the known knowns. There's a couple of known unknowns. There's more information to follow. We don't know what's going to follow, but we know it's coming. There's more information to follow from the DfE and the EF. There's another unknown that we know is there, how schools will take the tutoring on. A couple of questions have been talking about that. How will it look? Schools will decide how they do this. We're not in a position to tell schools how to do this. Schools will want to work with tutors and decide how it works for them and meets their need. The third known unknown is about the timing, the duration, and the location of the tutoring. We know it's an unknown, but it's something that will become clearer with time. So I think a couple of questions have come along that in that way. There's always the final one, the unknown unknowns. We've been living through very different and challenging, unprecedented times in education as a society as well. It could all change, but I don't think this is something that's been committed to. So we're committed, alongside Norwich Research School, to actually keep keen to support the development of tutoring in this context. And that's not because we feel we do it better than anybody else, but we feel that we can bring alongside your experience some of the evidence that brings alongside even better outcomes. So if you've felt this has been useful, we'll continue to let you know what's coming next. Thank you for staying with us for the duration of this event. Future events will be shorter. We just wanted to condense what we had into a hit at the end of this. We'll make sure that we send you all the information, and if you wish to share any feedback with us, we'd be only too delighted to hear it. You've got our email address there, contact-us@sptutors.co.uk.